It's off to school and work, waiting for some fun while my boss acts like a jerk. Pro show afternoons, midnight sketch can't come too soon. In the afternoon, and sketch can't come too soon. But at night, I'm filled with dread. I know just what I'll do instead. Come on and follow me. It's time, you see, for Lorn and Apollo. Time to laugh and learn. Come feel the burn of what the fandom was. What random fun doesn't escape. Isn't it great? Late night with Lorn and Apollo.
Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday evening. Glad to have all of you here. As you can see, I've got my good friend Martin Stone here joining me tonight. My understanding is that Kevin should be here later on tonight. I believe he's on his way. We'll add him to the panel once he is here and available. But our discussion tonight has been triggered by a discussion we actually had last night on the WDW Pro Show. That actually kind of got my wheels turning long after the show was over, and it was because of a discussion about the press tour for the Odyssey coming on, and something about that discussion stuck in my craw and made me want to go over it in a little more depth with all of my best friends. So that'll be our main topic for the night. There's actually a number of really good stories that came out today. It was almost an embarrassment of riches, so I've got a number of news stories to go through as well. We may not hit all of those, and we may jump around a little bit between them, but I think it'll be a pretty good show tonight. Martin, what have you been up to? Tell me how your week has gone and how you have prepared for this deep literary discussion.
Well, my week's been pretty good. I had interesting story from earlier today. I had an early lunch meeting with a guy. I showed up and he was nursing a headache and his second scotch.
Oh. Well, it was kind of a loose meeting then. I hope it concluded well.
Yeah, I think we're going to end up doing business.
Always best to conclude business arrangements when one party is inebriated.
Yes.
Well,
he seems steady as a rock. He's an old Marine. So.
Oh, okay. So he's got experience.
Yes.
In that case, more power to you, and I hope that the engagement works out well for you.
Thanks. But yeah, I prepared for tonight by just going over some of my favorite translations of ancient texts, as I'm going to do.
Well, it's you put a little more thought into this than maybe I intended. That's all right. And we may not stick strictly to the Odyssey when we're talking about this, because I think some of the concepts apply elsewhere, and that's maybe where some of the more interesting meat of the discussion can come from. Speak of the devil, by the way. Hello, my friend.
Hello, gentlemen. Sorry.
Howdy.
I accidentally went into the wrong room.
Well, I understand what you mean. Well, welcome to the correct room. Glad to have you here. We were just getting launched off on the topic for tonight. As you know, we're going to be discussing adaptation versus interpretation. But the chat hasn't seen you for a while, and they're eager to welcome you back. Take a look on the side there, and you'll see it. Why don't you tell everybody how you've been? Excellent. That went really, really well.
You notice he's always bedeviled by bears. There was that bear poster right behind him.
Yep. I do know that his internet connection is a little spotty where he's at, so he may have issues coming in and dropping tonight, but we'll bring him back in as soon as he gets back. In the meantime, we do have a super chat that is waiting in the back from our steady wrench Juliet for £2 saying, "Good morning, late night live with Lorn, Apollo, and chat." And there's the big man himself once again.
All right. Sorry about that.
It's all right. I don't know if you got a chance to look at all of the greetings there, but why don't you tell everybody how you've been, what you've been up to, and then we'll launch off on it.
Yeah, so it's been a little crazy. My doctor told me that I was healthy enough to travel. And then my life changed very suddenly because I'm, here in the wonderful Fontana Village. And after a tremendous amount of turnover, I'm now living my own personal Deep Space Nine because I am now the general manager in a far off place on sacred ground.
And people keep careers.
The only thing that's missing is a quark.
So the upshot is he has been extremely busy and burning the candle at both ends. So we're hoping things stabilize here in the near future for you. But health-wise, you're doing much better, is my understanding.
Yeah, I'm doing much better. I still have a boatload of medicine to take and probably have to do a few things in a few months, but I do feel significantly better, just in time for all the stress in the world. But it's okay. I just keep telling myself that as I drive around this massive village, and with all these new things to do, that I'm season 1 Benjamin Sisko with less hair.
Well, I'm sorry for all of the stress, but I'm really glad to see you, and I'm glad you're doing better. And I know the chat is too. Everybody's been asking about you.
I miss you guys, and I'm hoping, apart from the occasional, I think I'm entirely too tired to function as a human. I do intend to be back. So, yeah.
Awesome.
That's right.
I mean, you never call, you never write, you barely respond to the carrier pigeons.
I know. I've been terrible, but I'll be better now. All
right, we're going to kick it off with our first story for tonight, which is, predictably, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey trailer surges past 500,000 dislikes as official X account limits replies. Always a sign of confidence. The Odyssey has been buried in YouTube dislikes. Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey has become one of the most talked about movies of the year, but not necessarily for the reasons Universal Pictures may have hoped. The acclaimed filmmaker's adaptation of Homer's legendary Greek epic is facing a growing wave of online criticism after the official trailer accumulated more than 500,000 estimated dislikes on YouTube. The controversy has only expanded as fans noticed the film's official X account limiting replies on certain promotional posts featuring Nolan and the cast. According to estimates from third-party browser extensions that track YouTube dislikes, the official Odyssey trailer currently sits at roughly 65,000 likes, compared to more than 554,000 dislikes, creating a massive negative ratio for one of Hollywood's biggest upcoming releases. While YouTube removed public dislike counts in 2021, tools like Return YouTube Dislike have become popular among viewers attempting to measure audience reaction to major trailers and announcements. The response is particularly surprising because Nolan has spent decades as one of the few filmmakers in Hollywood who can sell a blockbuster almost entirely on his name. For years, Christopher Nolan has been viewed as one of the safest creative bets in the movie industry. The director behind the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Interstellar, and Oppenheimer, has built a reputation for delivering ambitious theatrical experiences that connect with audiences. His most recent film, Oppenheimer, became a cultural phenomenon, grossing nearly $1 billion worldwide and winning 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. That success made The Odyssey appear to be a victory lap for Nolan. The film combines one of history's most famous stories with a massive ensemble cast and a major theatrical push. Instead, the marketing campaign has found itself facing unexpected resistance. The growing number of dislikes has fueled debate over whether the backlash against the Odyssey represents a small but vocal online audience, as the Hollywood media loves to say, or an early warning sign of a larger disconnect between the film and potential moviegoers. The YouTube backlash is not the only online controversy surrounding the movie. The official Odyssey X account recently shared images of Christopher Nolan appearing with the cast during a promotional event in London. The Odyssey cast joins Christopher Nolan in London. Get tickets now to experience the Odyssey in cinemas July 17th, the account wrote. However, users quickly noticed that replies on the post had been limited, with X displaying a message stating, "Only some accounts can reply." That restriction meant most users could not directly respond underneath a promotional post. The visible replies that remained were largely positive towards the movie and its cast. The move generated criticism from some fans who argued that limiting replies created the appearance of avoiding negative reactions while the trailer was already facing significant backlash. The negative reaction surrounding the Odyssey has followed months of online debate over several creative decisions. One of the biggest points of discussion has been Lupita Nyong'o's casting as Helen of Troy, a figure from Greek mythology whose depiction has been the subject of countless artistic interpretations throughout history. The casting of Zendaya as Athena, one of the most recognizable gods in Greek mythology, has also sparked conversation among fans. Critics have argued that the choices represent another example of Hollywood changing established mythological characters, while defenders argue that adaptations have always reinterpreted ancient stories. Some viewers have also criticized the trailer's dialogue, pointing to characters using modern terms such as dad and daddy.
Ugh.
Those critics argue the language feels out of place in an adaptation of an ancient Greek epic. The casting of Elliot Page in a male role has also generated discussion, while Nolan's decision to include rapper Travis Scott as a bard became another major talking point. Nolan explained the casting choice by comparing the oral tradition of Homeric poetry to modern rap, an explanation that received both praise and criticism online. The controversy reached a new level when Elon Musk weighed in on the debate surrounding Nolan's film. Responding to discussion about the Odyssey, Musk wrote on X, Chris Nolan desecrated Homer and groveled on his knees just to meet the woke rules required to win an Oscar. What a worm. Musk's post quickly spread across social media, bringing even more attention to the divide surrounding the movie. His criticism appeared to reference concerns some viewers have raised about modern Hollywood adaptations and whether studios are prioritizing contemporary trends over faithfulness to original works. The biggest question now is whether the backlash will have any impact once the Odyssey reaches theaters. Online reactions do not always predict audience behavior, and Christopher Nolan remains one of the strongest filmmaker brands in the industry. However, recent entertainment history has shown that massive negative online reactions can sometimes indicate larger audience concerns. Disney's live-action Snow White faced overwhelming dislike ratios during its marketing campaign before ultimately becoming a major box office disappointment. Several streaming projects have also struggled after facing heavy pre-release criticism. That does not guarantee the same outcome for the Odyssey. Nolan's track record gives the film an advantage that many controversial releases never had. Still, a trailer from one of Hollywood's most celebrated filmmakers crossing 500,000 estimated dislikes is difficult to ignore. Whether the backlash fades after release or becomes a larger problem, The Odyssey has already become one of the most unexpectedly divisive films of Christopher Nolan's career. Kevin, you've been kind of sitting out for a while. Have you been following anything on The Odyssey since they've been really starting the PR campaign at all?
I kind of checked out for a little bit after I saw that the Sicilian Giants were wearing armor that didn't exist for several hundred years later, and then it's just thousands, right? I was super. I was so looking forward to this. I was super looking forward to this movie. And I don't think Musk's assessment is incorrect. We were talking earlier. I don't mind filmmakers kind of pushing, experimenting with casting every once in a blue moon, right? Because we all know every once in a blue moon, there's an actor who's just right for a role, or there's an actor who brings something very special. Case in point, Michael Clark Duncan being the Kingpin.
Lorn and I brought that up earlier between each other.
Sometimes it just works. However, for the last 10 years, we know that a lot of this stunt casting isn't because the actor was great. It's because you have to check a box. And when you do things like change the vernacular, it just takes away. It takes away from the story, and part of the fun of introducing people to old stories, or these classics is one. It is insight into how people used to behave. It's insight into how people used to speak. Insight into how important language is. So when you substitute something with modern, let's be honest, right? Modern vernacular is at its absolute laziest, most petulant, form it's ever probably been. Just short of us running around speaking Cockney all day, and even that's still mildly entertaining. Once you get the hang of it. But it's people are upset not because of the race swaps and all that crap. I'm sure there's a percentage, but I think it's more to do with people are just very disappointed. They expected something epic, something epic, something powerful, and it's just the same old dreck. And from someone you expect better from, because before Christopher Nolan super blew up with the Batmans, his films were always very engaging. They may not have been super hits like which one? Wait, which one of the magic magician movies?
The Prestige.
Thank you. We had two crazy magician movies at the same time. But you go back to something like the Prestige, and the Prestige was amazing, but it wasn't a barn burner. It was just a good movie. So with the track record that he's had, it should have again to the quote Ben Mendelsohn, "We were this close to greatness." And they just putzed it up.
I do want to defend a little bit the use of words like dad or daddy in this context, because those belong to a family of nursery words that actually transcend a lot of human borders. They are words that predate Proto-Indo-European, and so you have like Chinese, ma is the word for mother, because they're babble words that infants learn very quickly. So it's not inappropriate as a stylistic translation choice, and you'll probably hear me say this a lot. My problem is that we're no longer using an epic register to tell the epic tales.
I think that's fair. It's also, there's a little bit of hypocrisy going on when you have Christopher Nolan saying that, well, I didn't want to have an orchestral score because they didn't have orchestras back then. So we're going to have gongs that provide a lot of the music here, and also a rapper who's telling stories, because that's the nearest equivalent to a bard. It's like you've got to decide, are we being authentic to the period or not? Who are we telling this story for? When you're giving us these mixed messages, I don't think the audience knows what to make of it, other than that it starts to feel like you're trying to snow me, man, and I don't like it.
I really don't mind using period instruments to create a soundtrack for this. I think
that's not my argument. It's that if you're going to be authentic in one way, though, and claim that you're doing it for authenticness' sake, then you sort of have to carry that through the whole project.
That's kind of what I was building towards, yeah.
Yeah, it's the double talk, and it makes it sound extra disingenuous. It's because, again, if you're willing to double down and be very rigid in interpretation over here, but go the stark raving opposite direction over here, it just doesn't make sense. It just does not make sense. Again, we've seen loose interpretations. How many reinterpretations of Macbeth and Hamlet and King Lear have we had? And some of them have been extremely fascinating. So yeah, you can do something like that, and you can play with format, you can play with time period, but at the same time, those reinterpretations, there is still an element of fidelity to the story that allows you just go, oh, we're just kind of looking at it through a different lens. And also, too, you picked a mumble rapper, not even an actual storytelling rapper, so that's also extra irritating to me.
I meant to do this before we got on here and send it to you guys, but I found somebody who had recreated what it might have sounded like to hear this in Homer's era. They had period instruments playing. They were reciting it in the ancient Greek. It was pretty interesting. And ancient Greek is a very rhythmic language. There's a lot of stress and synchronicity, or there's a lot of
it's a little bit like iambic pentameter.
It is, yeah. Yeah, modern English, the words sort of run together, lean on each other. What we think ancient Greek was not like that.
We are skipping a little bit ahead to the main topic, so I'm going to pull us back for a little bit
Okay.
while we go to another story because I don't want to jump too far ahead. But our next one is Disney wants Lionsgate to bring back male audience, but Netflix may challenge them for it. Many industry observers argue that Disney has largely lost its male audience. No kidding, Jack.
Really?
Despite releasing a flood of Star Wars and Marvel content. According to Cosmic Book News, Disney may be looking to acquire Lionsgate in an effort to bring men back, and Netflix could get in its way.
No!
In recent years, Lionsgate has built a reputation around male-oriented franchises such as John Wick, The Expendables, and Saw. However, the studio also boasts a broader portfolio. The Hunger Games films attract family audiences, while I Can Only Imagine and Mel Gibson's upcoming The Resurrection of the Christ appeal to the faith-based film market. Lionsgate also experienced a major global success with the musical biopic, Michael. These are all areas where Disney has traditionally excelled. For Disney, a partnership with Lionsgate could offer a reliable pipeline of theatrical content designed primarily for adult audiences, especially men. Such a relationship could also help diversify Disney's theatrical slate at a time when concerns about franchise fatigue continue to grow across the industry. However, Disney may not have the luxury of pursuing Lionsgate without competition. Recent reports indicated that Netflix was among the companies exploring a possible acquisition of Lionsgate following its unsuccessful pursuit of Warner Bros. Discovery. Investors appeared to take the idea seriously, and shares of the studio rose by 14%. The streamer was quick to shut down the rumors. Netflix is not interested and is not pursuing Lionsgate, a Netflix spokesperson said. Yet the denial appears to have done little to quiet speculation. Ben McGloin at Cosmic Book News claims that insiders are telling him that Netflix remains interested in the Lionsgate catalog. After all, Lionsgate remains one of the few major independent studios with an extensive library of recognizable intellectual property. While Netflix has attracted subscribers through original content like Stranger Things and One Piece, established brands, premium intellectual property, and traditional Hollywood assets continue to make up a significant portion of its offerings. Having first access to Lionsgate properties could potentially attract more viewers and reduce subscriber churn. Meanwhile, Disney may be more interested in Lionsgate as a theatrical engine. As the studio searches for new ways to revive boy brands such as Marvel and Star Wars, which critics argue have lost focus, acquiring franchises with built-in male audiences could buy it valuable time. New John Wick and The Expendables films would allow Disney to continue filling theaters and eventually streaming platforms, while giving some of its own overused properties an opportunity to rest. As the Paramount merger with Warner Bros. Enters final approval, Disney may soon face even greater competition. David Ellison's company will bring Harry Potter, Superman, Star Trek, Transformers, and numerous other legacy properties under the same corporate roof, although I would argue that every single one of those is damaged. If bringing men back to movie theaters is among Paramount's goals, it will arguably be in a strong position to accomplish it. Whether Disney ultimately partners with Lionsgate, Netflix revisits its interest, or neither scenario materializes, the attention surrounding the studio reveals something larger about the current state of Hollywood. First, consolidation appears to be slowing down very little. Second, in an era increasingly defined by streaming, family brands, and global franchises, the battle for the male movie-going audience may once again become one of the industry's most important competitions.
I saw this movie once.
Go on.
Disney has this 10-year pattern where they acquire a property, drain it of its life essence for about 10 years, and then leave the husk to move on like a zombie and still produce things that nobody's interested in.
Agree. Did you hear my argument the other night that if Disney did acquire them, that the next John Wick movie would have him renounce violence, find a romantic interest, and open a dog shelter? You know that's what they do.
John Wick trying to become a Buddhist would be an interesting movie.
I'm thinking I'm a strong black woman now.
Yeah, it's I actually really like a lot of Lionsgate's stuff. I don't want Disney anywhere near them. Netflix looks a lot more viable to me, and I can understand them wanting to grab them after failing to get Warner Brothers Discovery. I would have a lot less of an issue with them getting Lionsgate than I would with Warner Brothers, although I got to admit, I don't think Warner Brothers looks like it's off to a real strong start either. I'm kind of generally against further consolidation of the industry because I think that we don't have a lot of studios left, and I don't think that's good for audiences. But I also understand that Lionsgate has been kind of struggling for a while, so maybe it's a good move for both. What do you think?
I'm just sad about who's in competition for it because neither company has actually been that good with courting the male audience. Disney's just out and out rejected men unless they think it's time to cash in on them. And Netflix is just so confused about what it wants to do, but it's woke mind virus. Like, it just can't help it. I still maintain that Stranger Things is one of the most anti-male things in existence. It just had a fake Freddy Krueger and a girl with X-Men powers as a colorful veneer. But Netflix has not given men anything really worthwhile to chew on, with the exception of Extraction, the
6 Underground.
So it's like,
well, I see Netflix as actually, yes, they put out a lot of that kind of content, but they also put out a lot of other stuff. They're heavy-handed on the woke stuff, but they are not exclusively that. Like, for instance, their first original series, why can't I think of the name of it? The Kevin Spacey series. House of Cards.
House of Cards.
That's something that I think attracts a male audience, or did up until everything fell apart with him. So I'd be more excited about them attempting it than several others that I could think of.
Yeah, I'm just sad. I think having independent studios is essential to the movie theater experience because, Netflix doesn't want to play with others. It just wants to hoard content and force you into the dystopian, you will own nothing and like it era. And then Disney, like I said, Disney just treats everything like a blood diamond mine. They're going to strip it, leave it bare, and then get mad at you for not liking the dreck it gives you.
But if Lionsgate is independent and Miramax was independent, then the term has lost its meaning. These are major studios. They're maybe not A-tier studios, but they're not scrappy underdogs who are just trying to cobble together enough movie to make their passion project.
Kid Canaveral is saying, again, it's not a lack of studios, it's a lack of distributors. Yes and no. You have a limited number of big studios that are acting as distributors. There's lots of little independent. I hesitate to use that word. There are little studios that are often sub-studios of a larger conglomerate. So I don't necessarily make a distinction there. But yes, I do agree with you. That's a problem, and that's why the acquisition of all of these assets under these major corporate banners is something that I tend to oppose. In this case, though, if Lionsgate is in trouble, I don't know how much trouble they're in, but it sounded like they were financially strapped. Maybe this is a way to rescue them and have them continue to go on. We do have a super chat here from Hembry Jeremiah for $5 saying, the best interpretation of a property would be Super Sentai and Power Rangers. Anyone who hates me, F off. I don't know anybody who hates you, but I'll take your word for it. Next up, we've got the Xbox CEO admits the business is not healthy. 3,200 layoffs as profit margins lag 3 to 10 times behind rivals. In her announcement today, Xbox CEO Asha Sharma unveiled the preliminary steps in her plan to restructure the company, which includes a huge number of layoffs, approximately 3,200, and the spinning off of some of Xbox's studios, with more changes on the way as the next fiscal year rolls out. But part of the announcement was devoted to explaining some of the issues Xbox has faced over the past few years, problems that brought the business to a place where a restructuring was necessary. Our business is not healthy, Sharma admitted as she began to explain why so many Xbox employees would lose their jobs as she attempts to whip the company into shape. Sharma explained that Xbox's profit margins are 3 to 10 times lower than comparable publishing businesses. That's a shocking figure, even with the knowledge that Xbox is trailing Sony and Nintendo in the video game market. Xbox is not just losing to its competitors, it's getting demolished by them. And if the rate at which its profit margins are less than other companies reaches 10 times as little, it's no wonder a restructure this massive is in order. Sharma also said that Xbox had a smaller install base and a higher cost structure heading into Gen 9, meaning the Xbox Series XS have sold fewer units than the PlayStation 5. Nintendo Switch 2 wasn't around at the beginning, and the Xbox consoles cost more to produce than the PS5, which combined to drive Xbox's profit margins down. Xbox made several attempts to offset these business problems, such as counting on its subscription service, Game Pass, to subsidize its losses. The failure of this plan has been widely reported for some time, as Game Pass subscription prices grew and its Call of Duty launch day releases took a big chunk out of the game's unit sales. Other attempts to offset Xbox's profit margin deficit included multi-platform releases and increased content. The former began in earnest in 2024, with games like Sea of Thieves, Pentiment, and Grounded being available on PlayStation and Nintendo consoles. This ramped up in 2025 with Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, Forza Horizon 5, and others. Meanwhile, Xbox has been buying up studios since 2018, with Bethesda Works, Activision Blizzard, Rare, Obsidian Entertainment, and more. Xbox was making more games through its subsidiaries and releasing some of them across a wider range of platforms, thereby expanding its customer base. But it didn't work, partly because Xbox simply couldn't keep up with the increased competition. Sharma said that the number of games now made across the industry each month outpaces the last 10 years combined, with independent studios giving Xbox additional competition to Sony and Nintendo. And buying up more of the competition was no longer an option, as Sharma revealed that Xbox was losing 64 cents for every dollar it invested in smaller game studios in a typical year. This, combined with Xbox's losses on each console sold, the Game Pass losses, and the reduced Call of Duty purchases, indicates a company in major trouble. Unsurprisingly, Xbox's core business weakened, and Xbox compensated for these problems by adding more teams, more investment, and more time, which equates to spending more money. And that's on top of the memory shortage that began late last year and is now reverberating through the video game industry, with price hikes across the board that will undoubtedly hurt sales. Now Xbox is forced to lay off thousands of employees and release some of its acquired studios, with possible closings still to come. The drastic action Sharma is taking to save Xbox are unfortunate, especially for the employees about to lose their jobs, but in light of the many problems the company is facing, they're understandable from a business perspective. Riding this ship is a daunting task, and the waters are only getting rougher. We'll see if Sharma's plan works in the coming years. And there was another story that I read about this that was talking about their approval structure within the studio to get decisions made. Oftentimes, they said you would have to go through as many as 14 different management desks. So that's part of why they're flattening the company, is they are trying to get it down to 3. And I think they said no more than 5 at a maximum, which is a start. But it almost seems like Xbox made every possible wrong decision that they could. They were essentially their own competition and helping the competition.
Xbox, call me. I do ops. 3 is still too many.
Yeah.
You need somebody with immediate approval, and that needs to be graduated at, like, somebody at one level can approve a budget up to $5 million on a game. Just send it out the door. Somebody else can approve up to 50 million, something like that. It's insane to have that many layers of corporate gobbledygook.
Yes.
Yeah, that was one of the things that absolutely shocked me when I read the story. It's like, could you imagine? I've been in places that have had terrible red tape, but 14 management desks?
That's just an absurdity. At the end of the day, Xbox went from being what it had 5 minutes. It started off as a joke, right? The first one with the ginormous controller. But then the 360 came, and it was the king. If not, it was the king's maybe a little generous, but it was the viable rival and the perfect component, the perfect accompanying system to your Wii, and then stay dominant until really the PS. I don't know. What do we consider the PS3 a flop? I can't tell, depending on who you ask.
No, I don't think the PS3 is a flop. In fact, I think it was the best Blu-ray player of its time.
It was.
And it was cheaper than a lot of quality Blu-ray players as well. The Xbox 360, though, was, I think, the dorm room choice of its era.
Mm-hmm. So, like, they red taped, they bureaucracied themselves into submission. And, at the end of the day, like, Sony is the top dog, not because of anything spectacular that it's done. As a matter of fact, I think it's kind of botched the last two systems. It's just Xbox has given you nothing to be excited about. And now we know why. And at the end of the day, they need to be running lean enough that if someone has an idea, well, it's one of those, like, so I point here, like, we're talking about our restructuring. And it's like, well, one of the owners kind of sat down and went, at the end of the day, this room is filled with a bunch of go-getters. And if we keep bringing in more people, more staff just creates problems for you. Because when you have to go do something, the five of us will just go do it. But then when you fill the room with eight other people, we got to worry about eight other people screaming, no, you can't do it. And that's not where we're going now. Xbox needs to be able to get up and go and get things done. So, like I said, 3 is still too many. If you can't get that down to a super simple structure, it's not as bad as it has been, but it's not where you need to be.
Well, the entire gaming space is kind of going through a massive collapse right now because PlayStation has just, I think, possibly permanently damaged their reputation with their announcing that they're going to be doing away with physical media post 2028, not to mention yanking movies that people had purchased through their movie storefront. They're not looking like the good guys anymore. And when you've got the escalating hardware costs that are coming, nobody's wanting to pay more for these consoles. And I think they were kind of betting on Game Pass because they looked at it as the way that all of the movie studios thought that streaming services would work. You would just buy a subscription and pay month after month after month, instead of the behavior that people actually engage in, which is, I'll pay for the subscription to pay the game I want, and then I'm canceling. And so you're essentially undercutting your own product. And also, if you go multi-platform, you're also taking away the incentive to buy your hardware.
Right. Real Life Fake Wizard has actually several videos on how bad Game Pass is for the games industry, and particularly indie studios that are getting pennies on the dollar for access to their games. It's drying up the pipeline of things to go on to Game Pass.
Yeah, we've already talked in previous shows about my concerns about hardware for the future. That's a very real concern for me. But there's a part of me that is secretly delighted to see all of these big producers suddenly having their uh-oh moment, because I'm hoping it reminds them that you are still at the mercy of the consumer. And if you serve the customer, we'll reward you. If you're not serving the customer, if you get greedy, if you decide that you're going to dictate terms to us and over monetize us, we will punish you. Gamers are the one place in the culture war that I am never worried about them taking a stand. It's like other places, things tend to creep in. Comic books, you've got movies, you've got TV, all of those places. Gamers are mad and they fight. Mm-hmm. And I always look at them as, you are the potential savers of culture here, because you're real enthusiasts.
I'm so happy that Sony just became just brazen about what it wants to do, because we've all been watching it coming like a freight train, and finally Icarus flew a little too close to the sun and forced people to realize, oh wait, no, I like owning the thing I purchased. The peak of downloadable content was Mass Effect 2. After that, they lost the plot, and it just became a scam to bleed you for every nickel that you have. And we know what's happening here. PlayStation doesn't like the fact that people still play their old games. So now they're making it harder for you to play your old games. They want you to have to pay for them in perpetuity. And then if you don't behave properly, they want to punish you for not behaving in accordance with their rules. And this is just the thing that we needed to get that snowball rolling down the hill. Because
and if a game becomes embarrassing, they want to memory hole it, and you can't get access to it anymore.
Yep.
Well, part of what's interesting to me about this is that PlayStation already learned a similar lesson. I think it was just 2 years ago when they were trying real hard to force you to link your accounts, so that they really wanted to go down the authentication pathway, and they yanked access to a number of games to certain countries that didn't want you to log into their PlayStation infrastructure. They lost that fight, and they got pretty embarrassed by that fight, and I sort of thought maybe they would learn something from that fight.
Well, and remember, they were also the platform when everybody realized, oh, I don't own these things, because things were disappearing from their libraries.
Yep. So I'm hoping. I have grave fears for the future about computing. We've talked about those. I think the industry is trying very hard to take away your ability to own software and now hardware. I'm hoping that reverses, but I think that their hubris has awakened people to the danger here a little bit, and I hope people keep paying attention. You've got to keep your boot on their neck. You've got to make them afraid, because they have made a tremendous strategic blunder here, and I hope they pay for it.
Well, let me play devil's advocate for just a moment here. Those discs that we buy are not the games.
Yes,
they are complicated accesses to download the games.
Generally, they are a license and authentication key. I agree with you. That's not the argument from my standpoint. My standpoint is, because when I've seen people making this argument, they always say, well, what about you PC players? It's been like that on Steam for years and years and years. You don't buy physical media. Yes, that's true. But on a PC, we have competing storefronts, and they tend to keep each other a little bit more honest. Valve was greatly distrusted in the beginning because they have DRM on their software, and initially they had a lot of features that weren't working properly, and so initially Valve took a lot of slings and arrows. But over time, they dealt with all of those technical issues that were causing them problems, and to my knowledge, I could be wrong about this, somebody would have to correct me if I'm wrong, but when they pull a game from their store, if you have purchased it, you can still download it. It may not be available for purchase anymore, but if you purchased it, you retain access. Now, if that is still too restrictive for you, if you are absolutely anti-DRM, there's always GOG, and they allow you to download your games locally. They do not have the restrictive DRM that we're talking about that would be on the Steam store, and again, this is competition in the marketplace. What these guys want to do is lock you into their storefront, lock you onto their platform, force authentication so they can see everything that you're doing, and have revocability of the software at their leisure. That is too much. That is far too much, and I think this is where consumer protections ought to be strengthened. So,
can we get it this far, no farther?
Yeah, basically, that's the argument. Next up, Supergirl coming to digital release just 1 month after release.
Literally dozens of people will be sailing the internet seas to the
throat. You think we're collecting scalps, gentlemen?
Oh my goodness.
Warner Brothers may give Supergirl a digital release sooner than many moviegoers expected. The speculation comes after reports that the latest film in James Gunn's DC Universe plunged a staggering 77% in its second weekend. According to several social media accounts, Supergirl will arrive on premium video on demand on July 28th, just 32 days after its theatrical debut. While Warner Brothers has not officially announced a release date, the projected timeline would continue the studio's increasingly aggressive digital distribution strategy. The approach places Warner Brothers at odds with studios such as Paramount and Universal, which have increasingly embraced a 45-day theatrical window. A recent Forbes article notes that They Will Kill You, Lee Cronin's The Mummy, and Mortal Kombat 2 all arrived on PVOD roughly 1 month after their theatrical debuts. However, Warner Brothers invested considerably more, to put it mildly, into Supergirl, the second theatrical film in the broader DC universe spanning both film and television. They Will Kill You and Mortal Kombat 2 also suffered steep second weekend declines, while Lee Cronin's The Mummy posted a more typical week-to-week drop. Films that underperform at the box office have increasingly appeared on digital storefronts just 4 to 5 weeks after opening, allowing studios to generate additional revenue through PVOD as theatrical attendance tapers off. Supergirl now appears poised to follow that accelerated release strategy. The studio's approach is not entirely new. Last year, Superman also made his digital debut after a relatively short theatrical window. DC Studios co-head James Gunn later explained that the decision was largely driven by scheduling considerations surrounding Peacemaker Season 2, rather than dissatisfaction with the film's box office performance. That explanation suggested Warner Brothers increasingly views early digital releases as part of a broader franchise strategy, rather than simply a response to weak ticket sales. Supergirl, however, arrives under very different circumstances. During Netflix's attempted acquisition of Warner Brothers, co-CEO Ted Sarandos testified under oath that Superman underperformed financially. That film, at least, received generally positive reviews from critics, while Supergirl did not. With both Superman and Supergirl reaching digital platforms on nearly identical timelines, the studio's increasingly compressed theatrical windows have become difficult to ignore. Taken as a whole, the pattern paints a troubling picture for the future of James Gunn's DC universe. At the moment, digital retailers including Prime Video, Fandango at Home, and YouTube list Supergirl for pre-order at standard rates, though none currently display an official release date. While fans may soon be able to purchase or rent Supergirl digitally, its streaming debut on HBO Max is expected to come somewhat later. Based on Warner Brothers' recent release patterns, Forbes predicts the film will remain a PVOD exclusive for several weeks before joining the company's subscription streaming service later this year. If it follows the same timeline as Superman, Supergirl could begin streaming on HBO Max as early as September 4th. For audiences who skip theaters, that means the wait to watch Supergirl at home may be measured in weeks rather than months, a stark contrast to the lengthy theatrical exclusivity windows that were once standard across Hollywood.
Yeah, that's the way to get them back into the theaters.
Well, I mean, increasingly, I think that they are still doubling down on streaming and wanting to kill the theatrical business. I do have a lot of respect for those distributors that are committing to a 45-day release window. Mm-hmm. I remember back in the day, a movie would stay in theaters for 2, 3, and if it was a hit, 4 months or more. So
he was in theaters for a year.
Yeah.
I missed it.
On Mortal Kombat 2, it was an elevated streaming movie. So the fact that it went to streaming after 30 days is not that big a deal. And I love Carl Urban. He's great. But it was structured like a streaming movie should be structured. So that and Supergirl, it's an apples to oranges comparison.
Would you compare it to The Mandalorian and Grogu then?
Yeah, but Mandalorian Grogu was also kind of a Disney Plus special feature.
Huh. I was not aware that Mortal Kombat 2 was of that quality. I sort of assumed it was going to be something
it was bad. I'm just saying it kind of intentionally leaned into that vibe of the 90s movie you would pick up at Blockbuster, or the direct to release Mortal Kombat sequels and things like that. It's better than those, but it's carrying on that tradition, if that makes sense.
So, are we collecting scalps now?
I think we are.
It's been kind of a fun movie season, a little bit. There's been some bright spots, at least. Sony blindsided publishers, stores, and even its own teams with the 2028 digital-only PlayStation games. Did you know this? This was new to me.
Although, why would you tell GameStop that's coming? Because you don't want to leak.
Right, but their own teams is interesting. PlayStation's decision to eliminate physical discs and only release games digitally, a policy that will take effect in 2028, was a shock to gamers, particularly those who value physical media and want to own their own copy of a game they paid for. But it wasn't just gamers who were taken by surprise. Video game publishers and local Sony branches were blindsided as well, according to a new report, with Sony neglecting to tell anyone about the shift to digital-only games, and it appears they're no happier than Sony's customers. According to an exclusive from High Chaos Run, an online gaming outlet, Sony did not inform its business partners or even its local branches about its decision to stop production of physical games, and it's causing concern, frustration, and outright anger. High Chaos Run spoke to sources who chose to remain anonymous to avoid retaliation, and they paint a picture not just of corporate greed, but of arrogance and a dismissive attitude toward Sony's business partners and retailers, and even local branches of the company, who learned the news with the rest of the world when Sony made the announcement on July 1st. High Chaos Run describes its first source as an executive at a major AAA publisher. This person told the outlet that the publisher was not informed about Sony's decision before it was announced last week, despite what the source called a seemingly close working relationship with PlayStation. And it goes beyond mere professional courtesy or business practicality, as the source said that employees of his company are slowly realizing they may lose their jobs sooner rather than later. This illustrates how far the reverberations of Sony ending physical disc production are being felt. Will publishers even be needed if video game production goes digital, which is a very real possibility now that Sony is leading the charge to eliminate physical games? Another source High Chaos Run spoke to is an investor in a PlayStation store being developed in India, which may not be built now that Sony has announced they'll have nothing to sell in a year and a half. This investor wonders why he or anyone else looking to get into the video game retail business would ever work with PlayStation again after they treated their business partners so shoddily. The investor also claims that the company's local branch, PlayStation India, wasn't informed about the shift to digital games either, and continued to ask for more money from investors as a result. This means even more people will be out of work, people who were going to sell Sony products, and they weren't even given a warning. High Chaos Run also spoke to sources privy to discussions between Sony and its business partners about the shift to digital-only games, and the conversations were described as frosty, with Sony taking a condescending take-it-or-leave-it attitude. Such a dismissive response to concerned or offended business partners is perhaps a result of Sony no longer needing them. If brick-and-mortar stores no longer want to sell PlayStation games, which would presumably take the form of empty boxes with download codes in them, similar to the Grand Theft Auto 6 physical release, Sony could sell games through PlayStation Store or other online storefronts. Removing basic decency from the equation, there's no need for Sony to be nice to them. And if that's the case, there will be little reason for Sony's business partners to maintain their public silence, especially if Sony is unwilling to budge from the shift to digital-only games. And after the angry reception to Sony's announcement, it's easy to guess whose side gamers will be on.
This is crazy to me. Just the announcement was one thing, but to find out they left so many people out in the cold with expansion plans in the works, that's malfeasance. That's not malfeasance. That's spiteful.
Well, this goes back to kind of what I've been banging the drum on, which is that it tells me they think that you're not going to have a choice. Mm-hmm. And normally I think the fear would be you're going to drive these publishers into the arm of some other developer. But Xbox is also trying to do away with physical and offering for those physical gamers a conversion to digital in your library, which does not solve the problem that gamers are complaining about. And Valve has been impacted by the inability to get hardware, which has greatly impacted their Steam machine release, which is of great concern to me. And there's a class action lawsuit going on right now about price fixing in the RAM market. Now, granted, this is the DRAM market, not the market that we're talking about for these gaming machines. But you got to wonder how much coordination is going on behind the scenes here. And normally, under a business metric, I think that my fear would be I'm going to drive people off to somewhere else. They don't seem to have that fear, although they have been very quiet for the last week. I think they're afraid to poke their head up on social media because they know they're going to get roasted. I think there is a possibility to have a great enough backlash that they will be forced to reverse course, but they're not going to stop trying to do this. So right now what I'm looking for is who's going to be an upstart? Who's going to decide that they're going to fill this gap?
I don't think you see one until Grand Theft Auto fails.
I don't know that it'll fail. I don't know that I'm that confident that they'll be held responsible.
I wonder if we'll get a resurgence of games that can be played on the average machine instead of high-end machines.
I think you're already seeing some of that. But I'm more thinking, I've heard that there is beginning to be some competition for NVIDIA and AMD in the graphics card market. I haven't done a great deal of research there, but somebody seems to be looking to potentially fill the gap in graphics cards. I still think Steam Machine is going to be your best viable alternative, whether that's the official Valve product or one that you build yourself and put SteamOS on. SteamOS is where I want to put my money. But right now they don't support NVIDIA, so I've got to wait for them to get the NVIDIA support before I can jump on that bandwagon. But I think somebody's going to look in the console market and go, there's a market here. Xbox and PlayStation are abandoning it, and there is a segment of the population that wants, say, single-player games, that are not live service games, that are not over-monetized, that have no need for an internet connection, and thus physical media makes sense. I think that there's a huge retro gaming market. If you had somebody that was looking to capture that market, now would be the time to be figuring it out because there's going to be demand.
I think GameStop has been ahead of the curve with their desire to purchase eBay, even though they don't have two nickels to rub together. The GameStop is looking at the future, going, where the three of us are in an era of male adulthood where we can still have some influence on the culture. We grew up with it. We're that lost generation that remembers the old world. But
the before times.
It's the before times. So like we can openly discuss our disgust for what's happening, but somewhere out there, is another young man who's listening in the corner going, yeah, that makes sense. I want to know what a Nintendo is. And, you go on eBay now, and now it's a dogfight to get a Genesis when just 3 years ago, no one cared about it. I think that there's going to be a huge shift towards getting your hands on content that you own, that you own, and that it's complete. And hopefully I really do hope that someone looks at this space and goes, hey, maybe we can jump in here. At the end of the day, we are suffering from Mr. Miyamoto passing away because that man was a gamer and loved gamers, and it has shifted Nintendo internally in a way that I don't think anybody ever saw coming, but it's also helped the feeling that we've got coordination in terms of trying to tell people you don't own anything and you're going to like it.
This is why I think the Stop Killing Games movement is important. I think this is an area where we have allowed EULAs to get way out of hand. I am not in favor of any kind of a future where the only thing that we do is license content perpetually. There needs to be ownership reintroduced into this in some kind of way, but the legal system has so little understanding of how anything digital works, and they are so far behind the times, it's hard to believe that we'll ever get any relief there. So
think about this. The same leaders who put the Digital Millennium Copyright Act into effect and didn't understand it then are still the leaders in Congress now.
Yeah, if they haven't keeled over.
Right. And some of them may have keeled over and they're not telling us yet, if the reports this week are true.
There is a super chat here that's relevant. That is from Solstice Studios for 10 saying, I have some games on Steam that are no longer publicly available and they are still playable and downloadable. That's my point. That's where I think Valve has actually gained a little bit of trust. Obviously, they could still turn into the villain. Gabe's not going to live forever. And there's a possibility at some point that they may decide they want to be a publicly traded company and they stop being privately owned. That would be a sad day for all of us. It's still a risk trusting Valve. But right now, they are the only company that I would say that I generally trust because they've earned it over time. By the way, I'm curious about the ones in your library. The two that I have that I am really glad that I have are the War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron Transformers games. Those things, I tell you, what they go for on the market for a key for those today is nuts.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They are extremely popular games, but they're delisted and kind of in a sort of licensing hell. I believe Microsoft currently owns the license, and there are rumors that persistently pop up that they're going to do remastered versions, but it's never actually come about.
I never really got into Steam until a couple of years ago, not for any reason. I wasn't against it. I just never took the opportunity to play on my PC because I have a tendency to buy older PCs and things like that. When I finally needed some for video processing, things like that, I got into it and, downloaded mostly stuff for the kids. Like, got a cheap collection of like almost all the Lego games, for instance, which I love. The Lego games are great, but it's not exactly what I would have picked for myself. I did get Indiana Jones and the Circle.
And the Great Circle.
Great Circle, yeah. I've
started it?
I have, yeah.
What do you think?
Gameplay is great. I'm through the Vatican level.
Vatican's huge.
It's big.
Do you have the DLC?
Yes, I do have some.
Okay, have you done that one? Because that takes place in the Vatican. It's sort of a subset of the Vatican. So go back near the fountain and find the priest with a parrot, and that'll start you off on another quest line.
This sounds like a Monty Python thing.
I know, but trust me, you'll get it when you see it.
All right.
Probably time to get to our main topic, which tonight is adaptation versus interpretation. And this came about for a couple of reasons. Chef Eddie, I saw that. That's not very kind. Last night there was a discussion on the Pro Show that was about the Odyssey. And it was a debate amongst us. And one of the panelists last night was Dreaming Tabitha. And when we were talking about the Odyssey and kind of railing on it, she was making a point that got under my skin. And yet, I sort of took her position during the conversation because I realized that, in a way, I agreed with her. And yet, that irritated me. I didn't like agreeing with her, and it stuck in my craw all night, and it was running over and over in my head. Why is this upsetting me? And to paraphrase, and I hope she will forgive me if I misstate her point, I believe this is what she was saying. Her point is that she feels that we are potentially overjudging a movie, particularly one that we haven't seen, but more importantly, that we as the audience are not owed a historically accurate interpretation of the text, and that the artist should be allowed to present the vision that they want to present. And in those terms, I agreed with her point, because that's what an artist brings to the table. You get to interpret a thing the way that you want. And yet, to my mind, as we were arguing the points, I never want to go, whenever we have these conversations, I hate arguing strictly from a standpoint of, well, you've race swapped this character, or you've got a trans person playing an inappropriate role for this character. I hate making those arguments because, as we mentioned earlier, there are times when an actor can elevate a role and it becomes something that you wouldn't have expected if you just looked at the role from one perspective. And I think the best example that you can give is the one that you mentioned earlier, which is Michael Clark Duncan as the Kingpin. That's a role where he makes sense in that role. Arguably, a worse example, one that is not a good example, would be John Wayne playing Genghis Khan. That's not something that's probably a good idea.
Also just not a good movie.
But what it really came down on, as I was thinking about this, and this is what we discussed last night, was, okay, I agree with you that the artist should be able to make whatever movie that they want. But if you're going to do something like that, like what Christopher Nolan is doing with the Odyssey, then what you should do is call it Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Or if you want to take Lupita Nyong'o's position and say that, well, Homer, how do you feel about the fact that you didn't properly center women? Which I think we can actually argue about from the text, but leave that aside for a moment. If Lupita Nyong'o believes that Helen is supposed to be the center of the movie, then name it Helen. Or if Penelope is supposed to be the center of the movie, which arguably that's a perspective you could take that would be, I think, possibly supported by the text in some ways, call it Penelope. If you're not doing a straight adaptation, don't call it the Odyssey. But then the next thing that I thought about is, okay, where's the line? What is the difference between adaptation and interpretation? And should there be some expectation that you're calling it out if you're doing one versus the other? Discuss.
Good questions, all. So we often talk about Indiana Jones and Star Wars because, Lorn, they're some of your favorites. But when Spielberg made Indiana Jones, he didn't call it Treasure of the Incas. Yeah,
right.
He made his own movie
Mm-hmm.
In the vein of a Heston movie.
Mm-hmm.
When Lucas failed to secure the rights to Flash Gordon, he made something else, and he threw in some Hidden Fortress and all sorts of other things. He didn't call them those things. He called it something else because what he decided to do was tap into the hero's journey and craft a new story that conformed to the manner of old stories. So when you want to wear somebody else's story as a skin suit to tell your story, that's where I have a problem.
I don't know that that's the same thing, though. What you're talking about is aping or mimicking a genre,
Okay,
as
that's
opposed to adapting an existing text.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of where this is important. And Putin 3 is saying Odyssey is fiction unless the Greek gods are real. Yes, we're not talking about strict historical accuracy, but we are talking about faithful accuracy to the text. And that actually brings in another thing here, which is, what is the text? Because understanding we're not reading this from ancient Greek, and it has been translated, but we're not going off of the original translations of Homer either. We're going off of this later literary work, which I don't remember the author's name, but
Wilson.
I'm sorry?
Wilson is her name. Emily
Okay.
Wilson.
You talk about this then, because you've got more of it that is good to get out there.
Okay. So Emily Wilson in 2018 released her translation of the Odyssey, which so her goal was to be accurate to the text, update it for modern language, and preserve its poetic intent by using iambic pentameter. And she succeeded in a lot of those ways. I think in some ways her choices in translation don't resonate with me. She sort of feminizes a couple of things, and it's fine. She's a woman. She takes some characters, or she takes some lines that are sort of delivered by nameless characters and gives them like a cohesive character. Like she created a new character to deliver lines instead of, chorus girl number 5 or whatever. My problem with her translation is, and this is going back to the register thing, she writes in a common register, and even though ancient Greek would have been the common language that Homer was speaking in, Homer was telling tales at events, and a lot of these are religious events. So he likely was speaking in an epic register within the common language, if that makes sense.
Now, I'm looking at the comments here because I think there's some interesting discussion going on. Where did that one go? There was one that I wanted to highlight. If Tarantino can have Brad Pitt take out Manson and save Sharon Tate, then Nolan can make his Odyssey. But that's still not an apples to apples discussion. Because one is a fictionalization of an existing historical event. The Odyssey is not a historical event, but it is a mythological text that has historical importance. And this is an interpretation of that text, not an adaptation. So that's kind of what we're talking about, is the difference between adaptation and interpretation, and whether or not that should be clearly indicated. Because I think what's really offensive about this in the minds of those people who are protesting it is that it is not a faithful adaptation. And yet most people who go to see it may not have actually read the text, and so will then believe this is what the text was.
Yeah. So I do think this is a really big problem, right? Because we are of an age where we would have read this in high school. We read Beowulf, we read To Kill a Mockingbird, and these classic texts are not required reading anymore. So these kids are going through school and entering adulthood, and they don't have the proper context to one, even just they have the desire to go out and find the original stories and read them the way they're supposed to be written. Or rather, read them the way they're supposed to be communicated to the mass audience. But now this is tainting what their expectations are, and now this becomes the definitive version of the Odyssey for an entire generation. And again, I think you're spot on. The real argument here is this was sold to us as the actual story being brought to life, with modern technology and modern storytelling, and instead we got a modern day reinterpretation, and they're not even using the actual text; they're using someone else's interpretation of the text. So yes, if you call this
so more properly, it should be Christopher Nolan's, Emily Wilson's, The Odyssey.
Yeah. Christopher Nolan presents Emily Wilson's The Odyssey.
Let me ask this though: with Baz Luhrmann's William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, he was hyper faithful to the language, but stylized in a late 90s, early 2000s way. Like the imagery was stylized, and then obviously the music, because Baz Luhrmann does that. That's his thing. What did you guys think of that as a? Was it an interesting footnote? Was it a desecration of the work? Did you like it?
Well, it is titled Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, is it not?
I think it's William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet.
Okay, see, I thought it had his name in it. Now, another one that I could bring up is I have seen a production of Patrick Stewart doing Macbeth, but it was in a modern military junta kind of a thing, which, again, it's displacing the time and the place. But in the case of that, it was faithful to all of the dialogue and the scenes.
Well, I want to say there's also a King Lear that came out recently that was... I am blanking on one of the most famous Welsh actors of all time.
Hopkins?
No. Yeah, Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins?
The one, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I don't see a problem with those if they're faithful to the story. And if they make deviations, I mean, this gets into a whole other discussion, but it's like, when you're doing movies, oftentimes, especially if you're adapting from text, you do have to make alterations, oftentimes. Sometimes for length, sometimes because scenes read differently in a visual medium than they do in a textual medium. So sometimes you have to reorganize scenes for flow. I think there's a level of that is acceptable. But this is kind of what I wanted to go to. This is why I thought this might be an interesting discussion, is Is there a difference between adaptation and interpretation? 2, where is the line? And 3, what is acceptable to be in one category and not in another?
I think the other problem that we're having is that there has been no, there's been no big cinematic retelling of it, right? So there's nothing there's nothing else that you can compare and contrast it to. Sure, we had a couple of of TV movies, right? The Armand Assante, Vanessa Williams movie from the 90s on NBC. There's a level of fidelity that I think people expect, and I disagree with the sentiment that the audience is owed nothing and has no say. When it is a writer's or an artist's original work, absolutely have no say. Like, at the end of the day, right, Rian Johnson will go down in history as probably the destroyer of Star Wars. But his first Knives Out, he can do whatever he wants with that character because it's his character. You get mad because he destroyed the essence of Star Wars because he had a story that he wanted to tell, and had he just made his own movie, hey, we have nothing to complain about here. So what Christopher Nolan is doing is he's taking something that is a seminal work that people have a certain expectation, and people will give you a little leeway, right? Because it is extremely difficult to do a direct adaptation from what's on the book to what's in film, just given the limitations of practical effects, budgets, and blah, blah, blah. And just time. Sometimes you don't have 17 hours in the movie theater. So you're going to make certain allowances. But when you go out of your way to start changing the film fundamentally, and again, we haven't seen it, so we don't know how drastic it is, but we all kind of have a feeling on where this is going because we know where movies have been the last 10 years. So this is one of those, the canary is at the bottom of the cage, and although we can't find the fire, we sure know there's a hell of a lot of smoke, pumping in the air right now. So again, I think audiences are if you're an artist and you're doing something that's been done, that's been established, that's well known, you do have a responsibility to meet the audience's expectations. Your skill set, that means your skill set must be high enough, and you must be confident enough in your ability to meet those expectations while also trying to bring something fresh. So it's and fresh doesn't mean subvert expectations. The fresh means, hey, I think I have a way to tell this story that's true to what that's true to what's on the paper and what you're expecting, but can give it to you in a way you've probably never seen it before.
And I would go ahead. No, Lorn, you have a point.
You made a super interesting point that I hadn't considered, but I'm going to take it from a different angle. You mentioned Star Wars. I think the better example is Indiana Jones. Because I think everybody agrees the Indiana Jones trilogy is near perfect. Very few people have complaints about it. If they do, it's probably about Temple of Doom, and that's because they're going to have a tonal break with it. But there's no question that was George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. You get to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. This is one that arguably you could say Spielberg and Harrison made under duress, and it was a George Lucas movie, but it's George Lucas's character. I would still accept 4. I know a lot of people don't. Now we're talking about 5, Dial of Destiny. Now, obviously, we're not interpreting somebody else's original work. This is an original work, but it's not George Lucas. It's not Steven Spielberg. I feel most people do not like Dial of Destiny. I may be wrong, but what does it say about adaptation and interpretation when you have a corporate entity that is now the steward of the thing, and you have somebody not connected with the original work doing an interpretation. Does that make it less valid, or is it of no consequence?
Well, isn't that at the heart of the great crisis of all modern IPs right now? It's that the stewards of the content don't really have an attachment to it, and they don't want people who have an attachment to it. We watched the longest reigning sci-fi show, in history, go up in flames. Not even 10 years after it had reached the height of its popularity. It was a startling implosion. And it was mostly done because of the demands of its corporate overlords.
Well, I think a lot of times, we say they didn't love the thing. They say they did. Sometimes it's the same way that sometimes a spouse will the husband will love his wife for who she is, and a wife may love her husband for who he might be. In the same way, a lot of these writers loved Star Trek for what they brought to it outside of itself. They saw that it was a progressive thing, and so they took their version of progressivism and said, see, this was always there. This is what it should have been all along.
I guess we've kind of wandered off onto a tangent.
Yeah, we
which
go back to it.
I didn't really mean to do, but there's a lot of things that are kind of interwoven with this whole concept that I think are interesting. So, tell me, first of all, I guess we need to define the terms of the argument.
Okay.
Is there a difference between adaptation and interpretation?
There can be. There can be. I think that they don't necessarily have to be different. However, they can be different. I think the answer is honestly both. It just depends on how far you take, your interpretation.
I like that we're getting yes, no, yes, technically.
Yes, but again, it can be both. It just depends on how far you take it. Again, I think a great example is Jim Henson's storytellers, right? Those you are essentially learning. You are getting classic stories, but sometimes they kind of go off the cliff a little bit, and just kind of the tone or the conclusion of the story changes because time, time, content,
Can I take a stab at this?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, interpretation is, to me, what does this work mean? And so, if you keep coming back to it and re-examining it, and the way you can with a great novel, actually any novel or book or anything, when you come back to it, you go, "Oh, I never noticed that before." That's a different you interpreting the same material in a different way.
Mhm.
Adaptation is, how do I retell this story for another age, another culture, in a new medium?
So I'm going to make an argument because I want to address what D.L. Fendel said, which is he's saying, no, there's no difference between adaptation and interpretation. And I think I understand what he's saying in that every adaptation is an interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's an important exception here, and this is where I'm going to hinge my argument. Yes, they are different, because if the original author is producing a production of his own work, that cannot be said to be an interpretation. That's an adaptation of his own work. He gets to define it. And this is maybe my argument in favor of saying that George Lucas is right to do the special editions.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Well, look at Heat. Heat is technically a remake.
It is a remake,
of Michael Mann's work. You wouldn't know that, but he, remade the movie with superior actors, and that now that's a seminal piece. However, if someone had turned around and who wasn't Michael Mann and remade that movie and they won off the rails, I could understand Michael Mann throwing a hissy fit. Or I guess maybe here's one that I think might work for people too. Michael Bay Transformers, Gen 1 Transformers. The Michael Bay Transformers movies are billion-dollar spectacles. I personally detested them from the word go. It wasn't what I saw in the comics, and the comics were also very different from the cartoon, as was He-Man, as was G.I. Joe. But it wasn't what I saw. It wasn't how I felt the character should have gone, but it was Michael Bay's interpretation. It's just how he saw Transformers, and he ran with it and did what he did with it. And some people loved it, some people didn't love it as much as they probably thought they did, and some people out and out hated it. But I think the difference is, and I think 90s movie watchers, especially geeky content people like video games and all that other video games, comic book people, may understand it. I think it's more about the perception of respect for the content.
Now we get into the press tour.
Well, that sort of relates to what I was going to say. When you look at Zeffirelli's Hamlet versus Branagh's Hamlet, and for context, Zeffirelli was Mel Gibson playing Hamlet. Those two movies take place. Well, so Zeffirelli's is weird. It's like in the ruins of a castle, so not as it actively would have been for Hamlet. But then Branagh's is clearly in a Crimean War era kind of time. But Branagh and Mel Gibson had different interpretations of Hamlet's state of mind within those two different adaptations of the play, if that makes sense.
Well, going with Branagh again, we could do Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein, which I think got a bad rap. I actually thought that it was a pretty good interpretation of Frankenstein, but it bombed critically.
Well, Frankenstein as a novel is not shootable as a single movie. Movies would compress the theological and philosophical arguments too much because they need to move along and fit into
it's a visual
2.5 hours. Yeah.
Yep. We do have some super chats that I should get to. One from Solstice Studios for 5 saying Firefly Codex is the one I can think of off the top of my head. We've got Chef Eddie for 5 saying this movement is worse than movies, Lorn. Penguin Classics edits, removes, and rewrites classic novels to make them less offensive.
Yeah. I wrote an article on that for That Park Place a couple of years ago now.
And then there's one that I starred from Cape Canaveral because I wanted to bring it up, saying John Carpenter made The Thing, which is a major departure from both the short story and the original movie, but it wasn't done to destroy the earlier versions. It's about intent, not adaptation. I would argue, though, that he didn't call it Who Goes There.
Well, okay, but what about Forrest Gump?
All right.
Forrest Gump is one of the worst books I have read in my life. Forrest is awful, and he's crass, and he's filled with a world of awful people. The movie that was produced was charming and life-affirming. They took, generally speaking, the idea that a man of limited mental capability was present for major events and turned that concept into a movie. It was an entire reinterpretation of the idea. Now, interestingly, the writer of Forrest Gump did what Cervantes did with Don Quixote, and he wrote a second book about how awful the interpretation was of the movie, the way Cervantes did with the second book of Don Quixote, talking about how the guy who wrote a sequel to Don Quixote was a hack.
Writers can be petty people.
They really can.
Chef Eddie, I think, is kind of making a point similar to mine for 5, saying the Coen brothers made O Brother, Where Art Thou based on Ulysses, but they did not call it Ulysses. They were not trying to displace the original work. Now, I don't think Christopher Nolan would say that he's trying to displace the original work, but I don't know. Do you guys understand why this stuck in my craw last night? Does it make sense? Because it's like,
Well, yeah, because when a person has a point that you agree with, but you desperately don't want it to be true, it can stick in your craw. Because, yeah, these artists have every right to make whatever movie they want. But then again, we as the audience have the last word on this.
are we justified in expecting that if you call the movie the Odyssey, that what we're going to get is an adaptation of the Odyssey, not an interpretation of a rewritten, already reinterpreted the Odyssey?
Yeah. I
Yes,
think that's the heart of the issue is that audience, if they had the duty to tell you out that this was not going to be a direct interpretation, or direct adaptation, this is the Odyssey via Christopher Nolan's vision, and again, when you say Christopher Nolan's making the Odyssey, it's I'm going to see. I think I'm going to the cinema to see this story. Not how Christopher Nolan wants to. Again, it's just I think the audience is correct in having certain expectations.
But I do want to back up to something here, because since none of us have seen this movie, that does create okay, the two things. None of us has seen this movie, and it seems that the woman playing Helen of Troy hasn't read the book.
Yep. And that was a point I was going to bring up. Should we have that expectation?
Well, I find that actors are barely literate in the first place.
Which is odd, considering their profession.
Yes.
Okay, so let me, if you don't mind, let me... I don't know if I'm playing devil's advocate here or not. I agree with you. You want your actors to be familiar with the source material. But let's talk about The Acolyte. How many times did that actor from The Acolyte go into interviews and talk about Anakin Skywalker blowing up the Death Star? And I think if people are honest in their heads, you recognize if you're a fan of a property, you want the people that are portraying the characters in the property to also be fans. You want them to know and respect and love the material, but practically we understand they don't. They're just doing a job.
Right.
So why would we put that expectation on Lupita Nyong'o if we're not putting it on every actor for every role?
Well, look at Connery. You never hear Connery talk about how great the book James Bond was. I don't know that he ever read them. He read the scripts for his movies, and he's great in those, but it's not book James Bond. At least not exactly.
I'm actually going to, because I see him making the point here. Frankly, all of the people feigning outrage that it isn't the Odyssey have never read the original either. I disagree. Now, maybe this is because I'm finally getting to the age where you can start calling me an old guy, but we had to read it in high school. And I think most folks of my generation, at least have a passing familiarity with it. And this is part of why we're taking it so personal, is that this is one of the foundational mythological epics. There's only 3 or 4 of these that are of this vintage that really sort of create the hero's journey that we always talk about.
Oh, and another important part of this is the 2 that we have, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are part of an 8-work cycle, 6 of which have been lost. So we have a fraction of what the Greeks would have known about this.
And I think that's why it's so important to get adaptations that reflect the actual story as it was written. We haven't had it. We just haven't had it. So when you go out there and you do something that's going to be a little different, again, it fills a space in the culture that it has no business filling. We are now at a point where we can see different interpretations of something like Macbeth, right? And because it is something that you got introduced to in high school. There have been very faithful adaptations of it. So now it's, for the most part, people know the story. The Odyssey is now something that, again, unless you read it in high school, there is an entire generation out there who has no idea what this is. The you know, I'll so it's just it's you. I do think that there is a duty that to the audience that you do put something out that gives you the scope and the grandeur and accuracy before you decide to go and do something different. And again, we know what's been happening lately. Storytelling has not been about storytelling. Studios are not cranking out content for entertainment. It's about subversion. We have seen entirely too many stories, too many characters just be ripped apart, for the sheer sake of we need to tear them down. They need to be deconstructed so that they can be replaced. This is, as far as I'm concerned, until they prove otherwise, this is a more passive aggressive version of what we've been seeing over the last 10 to 12 years, because being brazen about it is a guaranteed backfire. I do think there's an element of cowardice here. The only good thing that's come out of this movie is the endless AI, mockery of Elliot Page being put in masculine movies and being decimated. One of my favorites being the Roadhouse version of it. So it's people are. I think it is appropriate for people to be responding, frankly, viscerally, because you are entitled to truth in storytelling. I think it is absolutely absurd that kids are not reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and that it's on a banned list. That they're not getting exposed to Beowulf, that they're not getting exposed to Charlemagne. The more exposure you get to classic literature, the better your actual understanding of historical events. It is. These books, even now, these classic movies. So I always scream that you don't see movies made in the early 90s, 80s, and 70s anymore, because they don't want you to see what the world actually was. They don't want you to see how people actually spoke. How crass people could be. My favorite being Dirty Harry.
Oh, that's not 90s, my friend.
No, I'm talking about.
You did say 70s.
Yeah. But like, you don't see movies before a certain period in time because they want the modern kids to have a very specific view. And it's all about context, I guess, is the long and the short of it. It's all about context. Classic literature gives you insight into what the world was actually like at that moment in time when history was being built. Without that, without having the ability to have that communicated to you as faithfully as possible, right? Because we know too many people don't read now. You lose that proper context, and the more information gets filtered and transmitted to you through a certain lens, the more you lose it. And I really think that's why so many people are responding so viscerally to this. Even if I think just on a subconscious level, more and more people are starting to realize that we are losing giant chunks of our culture.
And specifically the canon works of Western civilization, which I think is an important point here.
Okay, and that's kind of where I wanted to go when I said that Lupita Nyong'o had not read the Odyssey, because there were some interviews where I think she said something along those lines. She was unaware of it or something like that until she was cast. If she went back and read a particular translation, I don't know, or if she just read the screenplay. But that leads to a deeper question. Are some of the things she's saying about what she thinks was in the original just not true? The things about centering women, and most recently that whole thing about Homer. If she got to sit next to Homer, what would she say to him? And about are you okay with women having this much screen time, or however it is she expressed it? There are powerful women throughout this story, and in particular, her character Helen of Troy has one of the most psychologically interesting scenes in the entire narrative. So I don't know what the gripe is here, except that perhaps she is unaware of the actual history of this thing and has simply been told old stories don't have women in them.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to read something here because I thought it was interesting. And this was in response to Lupita in her most recent interview saying what she would say to Homer. This was a tweet from George Alexopoulos, who I am guessing is Greek, saying, responding to the quote, "Very little time in the Odyssey is spent in the perspective of a woman." He responds and says, "O illiterate founder of Greece, the goddess Athena, a female, drives the entire story from start to finish. Her fingerprints are on every page. The entire point of the story is that mortals, in spite of all their pride and greed, are the playthings of the gods, and therefore must be humble and behave honorably, or they will be punished. The male god Poseidon is the antagonist, and the hero is Athena, who repeatedly leads the otherwise helpless characters to resolution and peace. This knowledge could be yours, if you read the book." But to that, Spencer Clavin responded, and this is a longer response, but I thought it was a good one. Homer would have been perfectly justified in focusing exclusively on men. It is actually allowed, in case we've forgotten, to tell stories about men and be interested first and foremost in men. That is still legal in all 50 states and parts of Europe. But as it happens, the Odyssey, of all classic texts, can be fairly described as obsessed with different kinds of women, with their psychology, their subjectivity, the ethics of their actions, and their roles in world affairs. Not only is the whole plot occasioned, as many have noted, by the decisions of the women that Lupita herself is playing, it's also driven by Odysseus's devotion to his wife, Penelope, who shows up before he does in the plot, and whose unique personality is the whole reason he can't just give up his journey home. He is the most famous wife guy in history. In the very first sequence where Odysseus speaks, the goddess Calypso is exasperated that he won't just give up already and let her make him immortal, which by any objective measure is a better deal than schlepping back home through yet more storms, loss, sleeplessness, violence, and agony. He replies that yes, by all accounts no mortal woman can hold a candle to a goddess, but Penelope is his wife, and he is willing to leave the bliss of the divine bed specifically because of the person that Penelope is, and what she means to him. In other words, the theme and focus of the poem, set up quite explicitly by Homer at the outset of the hero's journey, is the particular uniqueness of Penelope as a character. Her virtues, her wits, the match she makes for Odysseus, and everything their shared history means to him and to her. Not to mention that, of course, this is all given texture by being set against the really quite astonishing number of other female characters and the rounded humanity, or deity, they present. Besides Calypso, Helen, and Penelope, there's Athena, the terrifyingly relentless and inscrutable power upon whom both Odysseus and his son Telemachus depend to achieve their aims. Hera, the jilted codependent, Euryclea, the devoted model of resolve and care, Arete, the canny power behind the throne of Thracia, Circe, the scheming enchantress, and Clytemnestra, whose negative example as an unfaithful wife obsesses almost every character, serving as the foil and antitype to Penelope's heroic patience. I haven't even come close to exhausting the list. Then there's the Iliad, which, despite taking place very much in a man's world, still gives us unforgettable women. Andromache, tragic hostage of fortune. Hecuba, regal model of dignity and disaster. Thetis, formidable tiger mom. Aphrodite, petty princess of the gods. The poem closes with women's words, words of lament for the fallen hero Hector. I maintain that Lupita is a hugely talented and very beautiful actress who has been treated to extremely unfair and ungentlemanly talk in the press cycle around this movie. Her silliness here doesn't mean her performance will be bad, but it's sad that she defaults into this Disney princess press junket pablum. It speaks to the surpassing shallowness and boring ignorance of Hollywood's fashionable assumptions. Homer is so much more than this.
Again, that's at the heart of what I keep screaming. This is intentional. I'm sorry, it is, because they could have very easily turned around and consulted a historian, someone who understands the text and could explain it to the actors. They don't need to read it. You just need to talk to someone who knows and can give you cues and consult you through how you're supposed to be behaving in a scene. Instead, they choose the path of reduction. If you know anything about Greek culture, women have an incredible amount of stroke and influence on how men behave. And I'm not even just talking about the gods. If you had even an ounce of a knowledge of the story, you understand the importance of the woman in the story who drive the plot, who are the center of motivation, and who they themselves influence what's happening around them. But instead, it's women. Women aren't taken seriously. They don't get screen time. We are now strong and powerful. And it's like, well, no, like, I rant all the time. I'm going to catch some heat, but I'm sorry. We suffer. we suffer every day from suffrage. I'm sorry. We do. This absurd path that we've been forced on due to liberalism driven by feminism is single-handedly destroying the fabric of Western civilization. All because a couple of whiny witches wanted the right to vote. It had nothing to do with your gender. And it was all about your ability to serve in the military. And now we're stuck having these nonsensical conversations because a couple of wenches couldn't be bothered to pick up a freaking book. Go get the damn Cliff Notes.
And it is a shame, not the voting thing. Well, in its own ways. But the scene between Menelaus and Helen and Telemachus in the Odyssey is spectacularly complex and very interesting. I hope that Nolan is able to bring it to life well. But within that scene, Helen tells the story of her involvement in the Trojan War that shades her as almost a bystander. Basically, she says she was bewitched by Aphrodite. And during all this, Menelaus and Helen are presenting this unified, loving couple that are now successful and they're gracious hosts. But then Menelaus comes in with, yeah, but when we were in the horse, you kept walking around the horse and calling to the men as if you were their wives. And Odysseus was the only one who kept everybody restrained and kept them from coming out and getting slaughtered. You did that on purpose. Like there's this underlying tension between the two of them in that scene that's brilliantly played out. I just don't get what her truck is with this, thinking that there's not enough about women in it. Look, it's called the Odyssey because it's about Odysseus. It's his story to get back to the woman he loves.
Yeah, because that's what she was told. She
Right.
was told to say it, and she didn't bother to read it. And men aren't allowed to have things anymore.
And how do you get a Master of Fine Arts from Yale without reading the Odyssey?
That's what I've been saying. How the hell did that happen? Stop wasting your money and sending your kids to Ivy League school. Just go to community college and get a proper education.
So I don't know if we've answered the question, but we've circled around a lot of things about it. Where is the line? Because I do maintain there is a difference between adaptation and interpretation. And I think interpretation is allowed, but I do feel like...
But I feel like adaptation is also allowed.
Yes, adaptation would be explicitly allowed. I don't see any problem ever with adaptation.
I think the reason that we are never going to get a clean answer is because this is strictly based on it's subjective. It is strictly a subjective line. It's really based on the person who's doing the adapting. It's again, it's to Christopher Nolan in his own bizarre way. This could be him being faithful to the work. And we're going, bro, you need to lay off the pipe and go clear your head. So it's just, there's going to be debate, but at the end of the day, as with most things, there is a happy medium, and I do think that happy medium is rooted in your respect for the actual story.
So let me ask you another question that might be, I don't know if explosive is the right word, but controversial. If we don't think people are reading anymore, and we don't think most people are familiar with the Odyssey anymore because they haven't read it, why is this striking such a chord in the culture? Is it just because of the ongoing culture wars and this is just another front? Or is there something different about the Odyssey? Because I tend to agree with Fake Wizard that he thinks that this is woke Hollywood's The Empire Strikes Back. He thinks that this is them throwing everything in the kitchen sink into it, all of their beliefs, shoving it at the audience and thinking they're just going to own the chuds with it. And I don't know if I would go quite that far, but there's no question to me that there was some intent behind this that's beyond just winning awards. They're baiting the audience, and we know it. So I guess the question is, are we just falling for the bait, or is there something deeper behind this?
If you look back at history and see, like, the Crusades, Europe was not particularly religious. It was having, it was broadly Christian, but it wasn't particularly faithful. But as soon as another religion conquered the Holy Land from the Eastern Empire, suddenly the Western Empire went, oh, well, we got to defend the Eastern Empire that we've been fighting like crazy for years. And everybody galvanized. Maybe this is like that. Maybe all of this has been,
they forced us to get religion, is what you're saying.
well, in a way, yes, to rediscover a passion for who we are, even if we don't really know what that is.
Yeah,
all right.
I think this had the unintended consequence of galvanization. Because I think this is what I think. Because people don't read, because schools don't, because the quality of education has shifted from when we were kids, even from when and our parents say the same thing about when they were kids. The quality of education, information, and the desire to actually teach critical thinking and to seek out knowledge is radically different. I think that these studios, these producers want, yes, the world is rife with useful idiots, and now is the time to strike. We keep losing, but this is it. This is our moment, and we're going to do it, and we're going to do it with a seminal work. And if we can tell this story the way we want this story told, well, it's not just about owning the chuds, it's about owning the dummies too. And I think that there's just enough people out there who are so tired of the lunacy and are so tired of the lack of thought and lack of critical thinking and just the decimation of intellect that people are pushing back. And they thought they could throw a couple of black faces out there and use them as their ebony shield, because you can't criticize black women without someone on CNN demanding that you be excommunicated from the planet. And it's just people don't care. People have kind of had it. People have had it. So unless this movie is so good that it actually that your heart actually starts glowing inside of your chest, and you are elevated to another consciousness, like L. Ron Hubbard himself came back, and you got all the Thetans. This is going to be a disaster. People will go hate watch this and go see it out of curiosity the first week, and then this movie's going to fall off of a cliff.
All right, so I got. Oh. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I responded to this in the chat, but I wanted to say it out loud too. So Putin 3 asked, so if I'm saying, is this little movie the new Crusades? I'm not. I'm saying the pattern holds. This little movie is a puppet show compared to the Crusades. It's nothing, but it's a similarly galvanizing thing culturally.
It's a front in the culture war. Mm-hmm. But that leads to my next question, which actually is going to be my last question, and it's a two-parter for both of you. 1, are you going to see the movie? 2, what does it make domestic opening weekend?
It's a Nolan movie, so I think a lot of people are going to see it. I am a sucker for epics like this, and this I want to believe that the things I'm saying are true, that it's just that this is textually faithful, and the actors and actresses just don't know the text, and so they think they're doing something radical. So I'll go see it. Maybe
box office.
I think it'll be respectable enough that they'll 90 million, 100 million.
Will they do a sequel? Kevin?
I will not see this because I'm unless I get a little DM that says, "Hey, I need you to do this so we can talk about it." I'm out of the business of giving people money that they don't deserve, and I'll watch it just for the sheer sake of I have to have certain streaming services because my wife may watch something on that streaming service. So if I get bored enough, I may sit down to see what all the fuss was about, but I will not give them my $100.
I have not made up my mind if I'm going to go see it yet, but I'm going to say opening weekend 65 to 70.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm hoping just because I love Schadenfreude. I do. I love it.
We'll see. Time will tell.
And mine is just an uneducated wild guess.
Yeah, I think Nolan's name still carries a lot of weight, and I think that people are going to be curious. I think people are going to be curious. I think people at YouTube channels alone are enough to get this to 60K. I mean, to 60 million. But depending, I don't know how much does this movie cost to make.
I'm sure it wasn't cheap.
So, I'm sure this needs to be 100 million in order for people to want to call it a hit. They're going to call it a hit if it makes at least 50. But again, I'm more curious about the second week and the third week.
DL is telling us in the chat that it's already made more than we're saying, just in advanced ticket sales.
Well, I haven't been looking, but it'll be interesting to see what it actually comes out at. So we'll find out. I do have one super chat to get to before we close it out for the night. That is from Darth Maul's lower half for €5. Hail, panel. Lorn, your Dark Lords of the Sith episode was phenomenal. Made me read Tales of the Jedi again. Bane and Old Republic next. And let me also suggest that the Knights of the Old Republic comic book series from Dark Horse was excellent. Anything by John Jackson Miller, actually, in comic or novel form, well worth your read. And I would definitely recommend that.
I just read a different book by him.
John Jackson Miller?
Yeah.
Which one?
Batman Resurrection.
I did not know that he had written anything Batman.
It is a sequel to the 89 Batman that takes place before Batman Returns.
All right, cool. Gentlemen, anything else to report, say, or push before we close it out for the night?
Yes, well, I'm part of the Lost Guys with Trish and Nolan Thunder and Hangry Table. When we get around to it, we'll put more episodes up on That Park Place here. And then that'll be a member exclusive for a couple of months before it goes up on T3PO. But you can find our back catalog in both of those places now.
Kevin?
I was trying to find the box office estimates, but I'm trapped in an endless wave of sniffing our own farts and overpraising this movie, from Screen Rant and all the others. But I am trying very hard to be back. And I'll probably start doing some more YouTube-y stuff for the sheer sake of my sanity, because as beautiful as it is here, there's really nothing to do. So,
well, we are planning to do the Cinema of 89 come Friday, so start putting your lists together for that. That'll close out the decade of the 80s. And then we'll have to figure out what we're going to do beyond that. Until then, folks, thanks for being here tonight. Hope you enjoyed this. We've been doing a little bit more of these longer form discussions. You guys seem to like it. Let us know if you want us to continue that, or if you have particular subjects you'd like us to cover. In the meantime, until then, take care. We'll see you all soon.
The bell rings every morning. It's off to school and work. Waiting for some fun while my boss acts like a jerk. Pro show afternoons. Midnight sketch can't come too soon. The afternoon sketch can't come too soon. But at night I'm filled with dread. I know just what I'll do instead. Come on and follow me. It's time you see for Lorn and Apollo. Time to laugh and learn. Come feel the burn of what the fandom was. What random fun doesn't escape. Isn't it great? Late night with Lorn and Apollo.